The tomatoes were what saved me. I'd gone out to the backyard garden at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning, the kind of pale Tennessee morning where the sky hasn't decided yet if it wants to be cloudy or clear. Harold had built those raised garden beds the summer before he got sick, cedar planks, 18 inches high, so I wouldn't have to bend so far. He thought of everything except the part where he wouldn't be here to see me use them. I was reaching for a cluster of romas on the far side of the bed when it happened. A sound in my head that wasn't quite a sound, more like a radio frequency cutting out. My right hand stopped working. Not in a dramatic way, not pain exactly, just an absence, like my body forgot what hands were for. I grabbed the cedar plank with my left, held on, tried to see something, I don't know what, maybe just help, maybe just Harold out of old habit. Nothing came out. My mouth opened and the words weren't there. I stood like that for what the doctors later told me was probably 20 minutes, holding a cedar plank, looking at tomatoes, waiting for my brain to find the words it had dropped somewhere on the way to my mouth. My name is Irene, and I'm 67 years old, and what happened to me in that garden was a TIA, a transient ischemic attack. A ministroke, they call it. Transient because it passes, but what came after didn't pass so easily. The neighbor girl, Tamsin, 22, rents the duplex next door, saw me through the fence slats when she came out to put recycling at the curb. She said I looked like a garden statue, just standing there, perfectly still, one hand on the wood. She called 911 before she'd even finished saying my name through the fence. I remember the ambulance ride in pieces, a young man with a red beard talking to me slowly and clearly. The ceiling of the vehicle, someone asking who to call. My daughter, I said, or tried to say. The words were coming back by then, clumsy and slow, like feet that had fallen asleep. Her number is in my phone. What followed was something I didn't fully understand, until days later, when a nurse named Abigail sat down beside my bed with the quiet, careful expression of someone delivering news they'd rather not deliver. The hospital had tried to reach my daughter 11 times over the first 6 hours. Her phone rang. It went to voicemail. It rang again. She had not turned it off, had not blocked the number. The call simply went unanswered, the way you let a telemarketer ring through when you're busy with something more important. Abigail didn't editorialize. She just told me the facts gently and squeezed my hand. Before I tell you what I found out next, if these kinds of stories about family and truth and finding your footing after someone knocks it out from under you, if those stories mean something to you, please take a moment to subscribe to Silver Revenge and leave a like. Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. Some details in what I'm about to share have been adjusted for privacy, but I promise you the truth of it is real. Every word of it is real. I want to tell you about the woman who was in the room when I woke up, because she is the reason I know the difference now between people who love you and people who need you. Her name is Willa. She's 38 years old, and she teaches 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary, and she was one of my students 23 years ago when I was still teaching, and she was 15, and her mother had just left, and her father was working double shifts at the rail yard. She used to stay after my class on Fridays, pretending she needed help with essays, when really, she just needed somewhere warm to sit where an adult might ask how she was doing. I asked every Friday for 2 years. When she aged out of needing that, we stayed in touch the way people do when something real has passed between them. Cards at Christmas. A phone call on birthdays. When Harold died 18 months ago, she showed up at the service with a covered dish and sat in the back row and didn't make a fuss about it. That was Willa. The hospital had my emergency contacts in my intake file. My daughter first. Then, because my daughter didn't answer and I was unconscious and they were running out of options, someone found the paper list in my wallet, the one Harold made me keep there years ago because he didn't trust phones to hold information forever. Willa was on it. My daughter was not the only person I trusted. She drove 40 minutes from Clarksville, sat in the room while I slept, was there when I opened my eyes. I thought you were my daughter for a second. The light was wrong. I was groggy. She smiled like she knew exactly what I meant and wasn't hurt by it. "How long have you been here?" I asked. She looked at her watch. "About 9 hours. I tried to reach your daughter, she said. I wanted to let her know you were awake. Her voicemail is full. I lay there looking at the ceiling tiles and thought about my daughter's full voicemail. She was 41 years old and she lived 40 minutes away, and her voicemail was full. Willa pulled out her phone because I asked her to. She found my daughter on social media. My daughter keeps her profile public because she sells handmade candles and needs the visibility, and what I saw there made the ceiling tiles swim. A weekend retreat in the Smoky Mountains. She and her husband, arms around each other on a trail. Linen and hiking boots and a golden retriever that wasn't theirs, borrowed for the photo, I assume. The caption read, "Unplugging to recharge. No Wi-Fi, no obligations, just nature and each other." Posted 14 hours after Tamsin called 911. No Wi-Fi. Willa set the phone face down on the bedside table and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. My daughter had Wi-Fi. The post had a geotag. The mountain inn they were staying at has a 4-star rating on every travel site and its own breakfast buffet and, I later confirmed, excellent high-speed internet. No obligations, the caption said. I was the obligation. I closed my eyes and tried to remember when that happened, when I became something to unplug from. Harold's funeral is where I think it started, or at least where I first felt it clearly. My son-in-law. I'll call him what he is. I never gave him a name I was fond of. He spent the reception talking to my neighbor about property values. He shook hands with Harold's brother and asked within 10 minutes how much Harold's workshop tools might be worth at auction. I told myself he was nervous. I told myself grief makes people strange. I made excuses with the ease of long practice, the way you learn to translate other people's rudeness into something you can live with. After the funeral, my daughter visited 4 times in 18 months. I counted. Not because I'm bitter. I'm past bitter, which is a different kind of peace, but because I want to be accurate. 4 times. Each visit was shorter than the last. The final one was 40 minutes, just long enough for her husband to walk through the house in that slow, measuring way he had, hands in his pockets, pausing at the windows, commenting on the light in the back rooms. Good bones, he said about my dining room. Harold built those shelves himself, I said. His eyes moved past them to the square footage. 8 months before my TIA, my daughter called on a Sunday. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was what she said after the "How are yous?" Mom, I've been thinking about your situation. My situation. You're alone in that house. It's big for one person. And maintenance alone. I just worry. I told her I managed the maintenance fine. I had a handyman I trusted. A lawn service in summer. Willa's husband had fixed the roof gutter in October and refused to take anything for it but dinner. I know, my daughter said, but have you thought about what happens if something goes wrong? Like if you had a fall or something? I hadn't had a fall. I was healthy, walking 3 miles every other morning, tending the garden Harold left me, going to the library on Thursdays, teaching a free writing class for seniors at the community center on Monday afternoons. I told her this. She said, I know, Mom, just thinking ahead. I thought that was love. I realize now it was reconnaissance. 3 weeks after I came home from the hospital, my hip was fine. It was the TIA. I was on new medication and taking things more slowly, but I was home. A letter arrived. Thick envelope, official looking. Return address from something called Lakeview Transitions, a facility in Brentwood with a website full of photographs of elderly people doing watercolor painting in sunlit rooms. Inside was an information packet, and inside the information packet was a partially completed intake inquiry form. Patient name, Irene Slayton. Patient age, 67. Reason for placement, cognitive vulnerability, history of neurological episodes, unable to safely maintain independent living. Family contact, my daughter's name, her handwriting, her cell number. The form was dated 5 weeks before my TIA. 5 weeks before I had a stroke, my daughter had already filled out the intake form for a memory care facility. I sat at Harold's kitchen table, our kitchen table, and held that piece of paper for a long time. The cat, a gray tabby named Fig, that Harold rescued the year before he died, jumped up and butted his head against my elbow. I let him. I needed something warm. I called Willa. She came over that same evening. We sat at the table with the form between us and a pot of coffee. and she listened while I talked through all of it. All the pieces I'd been arranging and rearranging in my head since the hospital. The unreturned calls, the mountain retreat, the way my son-in-law walked through the house with his hands in his pockets, the Sunday phone call asking if I'd thought about my situation. And now this, a form she'd filled out and mailed. Not submitted on mine, mailed so there'd be a record, to a facility with a brochure that asked very specific questions about property value, outstanding mortgage, savings accounts, insurance policies. There was no outstanding mortgage. Harold had paid off the house 11 years before he died. I had savings. I had Harold's pension. The house, in a neighborhood where young families had been buying and renovating for 6 years, was worth considerably more than when we bought it in 1989. She was planning to have me declared incompetent, get me placed, assume financial oversight, sell the house, and when I had the TIA, and I believe now she saw that as confirmation, as the universe cooperating with her timeline, she didn't come. Because why rush? The medical event would do the work. A woman alone, freshly out of the hospital, a neurological history, perfect for a competency petition. No need to sit in a hospital chair when the paperwork was already in motion. She hadn't counted on Willa. She hadn't counted on Tamsin, 22 years old, who saw a woman standing statue still in a garden and didn't just walk past. She hadn't counted on the fact that I had spent 40 years being the person who showed up for other people. And some of those people were going to show up back. I called a lawyer. Her name isn't important, but she was recommended by a woman in my writing class who described her as someone who doesn't flinch. That was exactly what I needed. We met in her office on a Thursday. I wore the green cardigan Harold gave me for my birthday, the one he chose himself at a shop in Nashville, because he said it was exactly the color of early spring. If I was going to do something permanent, I wanted to do it feeling like myself. I told my lawyer everything. I showed her the form. She didn't flinch. First thing she said, cognitive evaluation, on record, today if possible. If they try to contest, we need documentation that you are fully competent. We scheduled it for that afternoon. The neurologist, a calm, careful woman named Dr. Fontaine, who had seen me since the TIA and knew my case, administered the evaluation and wrote her letter the same week. No signs of cognitive impairment. No indicators of decline. Functioning at or above baseline for age and education level. Clear as weather. Then we rewrote everything. I had a will. Harold and I wrote it together when we were in our 50s, back when we assumed our daughter would be the natural heir, and that felt like the right shape of things. That will no longer reflected reality as I understood it. The new documents included a living trust, active immediately, not upon my death, so it could not be used as a pretext for a competency case administered by my lawyer. My granddaughter, who was 8 years old and had my late husband's eyes, and had made me a bookmark out of construction paper and pressed flowers for Christmas that I kept on my nightstand, she received an education trust, managed by my lawyer as trustee. Neither my daughter nor her husband would have any access, oversight, or influence over those funds until my granddaughter was 25. To Willa Beckett, $45,000, with a letter explaining that a good teacher is worth more than the salary they're given, and that what she gave a difficult 15-year-old was worth more than either of us could calculate. To the Millbrook Community Library, $20,000, directed to their literacy outreach program. To the senior writing class at the community center, $15,000, to fund the program for 5 years after I was gone. My daughter and her husband received nothing. My lawyer looked at me over the papers. You understand this is final. I understand it better than anything I've signed in years. She nodded. One more thing I'd recommend. Let them come to you. Don't reach out. Let them discover this on their own. I didn't have to wait long. My daughter called 3 weeks later, not because she'd heard about the will, she hadn't, not yet, but because she'd called the hospital for my records, I later learned, to support the competency petition she was preparing with her husband. The hospital mentioned I'd been discharged in good condition and was receiving outpatient follow-up. This was apparently not the news they wanted. Mom, she said, her voice soft and concerned in a way that might have worked on me a year ago. I've been so worried. I should have come sooner. The retreat. We didn't have service, honestly. The mountains were just You posted 14 times, I said. Silence. With a geotag, I said. 14 posts in 48 hours. The hospital called 11 times. Mom, that's not. I let her try for a moment. Then I said, I'd like you to come to the house, Saturday if you can. There are some things I need to discuss. She said she would. She said, of course. She said, of course. She said they'd both come, her and her husband, as if I'd invited him, which I had not. But I expected him. I knew he would come. They arrived at 11 on Saturday morning in the car they'd bought last spring. He was dressed like a man who had done research on how to appear unintimidated. My daughter wore the expression she'd worn since childhood when she knew she'd done something wrong and was hoping I hadn't noticed. I had noticed. I had Willa with me. Not as a witness, exactly, more as ballast, something true in the room to hold onto. When my son-in-law saw Willa at the kitchen table, his face tightened. What is she doing here? I invited her, I said. Sit down. This is a family matter, he said. Then it should be very comfortable for her, because she's the one who slept in a hospital chair for 2 nights. You, I said, sat in a mountain inn with a 4-star breakfast buffet. Sit down. They sat. I put the Lakeview Transitions form on the table between us. I didn't say anything. I let them look at it. My daughter's face went the color of old chalk. She looked at her husband. He was faster. His composure was harder to crack. That's just research, he said. We were being proactive about your care. I was perfectly healthy when you mailed that. I pointed to the date. You live alone. You're getting older. A neurological event happened after this was sent. I put my finger on the postmark. You didn't know I would have a TIA. You were building toward this before I'd done anything to worry about. You called the neighbor on the left, I said. Mrs. Haverford. I spoke with her this week. You asked if I seemed confused. You asked if I left the stove on. She told you I was sharper than her grown children and she didn't appreciate the implication. You called someone from my library book club. Same questions. Same pattern. My daughter opened her mouth. He put his hand on her arm, brief and controlled. We were concerned, he said. The financial section, I said. I tapped the form. It asks about property value, outstanding mortgage, savings, insurance policies, all of it filled in. Your handwriting, I told my daughter. Your phone number is family contact. If this was concern, it was very specifically organized around what I own. The room was quiet. He tried one more time. You're being influenced, he said. He looked at Willa. By someone who doesn't have your best interests? I stopped him. 37 years ago, I said, I stayed late after school every Friday for 2 years with a 15-year-old girl who had nobody sitting at her kitchen table at night. I drove her to her college orientation because her father couldn't get off his shift. I went to her first classroom when she got her teaching job, helped her hang things on the walls, brought a plant for the windowsill. I did these things without keeping a list or expecting anything back. She came to Harold's funeral and sat in the back and didn't make a fuss. She drove 40 minutes and sat in a hospital room for 9 hours and was there when I opened my eyes. That is who is sitting at this table. And you, I said. You asked about my property taxes 6 months before I got sick. You walked through my house looking at the square footage. You filed a memory care inquiry before anything had happened to my memory. I know who is here for me. The question is whether you do. My daughter was crying. Quietly, the way she used to cry when she was small. Part of me wanted to reach for her, the way I would have a year ago. Instead, I sat still. I've made changes to my estate, I said. My lawyer has everything. You're welcome to review it through proper legal channels. I will tell you now that contesting it will require you to overcome a documented cognitive evaluation from my treating neurologist, 2 independent witnesses, and a notarized trust that is already in effect. You are welcome to try. You will spend a great deal of money to lose. My son-in-law stood up. He did the thing that men like him do when they don't get what they came for. He spoke from the doorway, a parting shot meant to sound like concern. When you really need help, he said, and I mean really need it, Don't count on a retired schoolteacher to manage your care. I looked at him from across the kitchen Harold built. I already needed help, I said. I was standing in my garden, unable to speak, and a 22-year-old girl I barely knew saved my life. I was unconscious in a hospital, and a woman I once taught to write topic sentences sat beside me for 9 hours. The person who wasn't there was my daughter. So the question of who will manage my care has already been answered. It just wasn't answered the way you planned. They left. My daughter looked back once from the driveway. I didn't know what she was looking for on my face. Whatever it was, I hope she found it, because I was looking back with something that took me a while to name. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Clarity has a specific texture. It's quiet and slightly cold, and it doesn't ask anything of you. The months after that were ordinary in the way that hard things sometimes are. I went back to my writing class on Mondays. I finished Harold's garden that autumn and put it to bed for winter the way he'd shown me. Cut back the canes, mulch the crowns, leave the ornamental grasses standing because the birds need somewhere to shelter when everything else goes bare. I went to the library on Thursdays. I had Willa and her husband over for dinner twice a month, and we sat at the table Harold made and ate and talked and laughed at things that weren't sad. My granddaughter came to visit 3 times that fall, brought by her school friend's mother, who had apparently heard something through channels I didn't trace and decided to be quietly helpful. My granddaughter was 8 years old and had recently developed strong opinions about pancake shapes and was teaching herself to play the ukulele from videos on a tablet. She sat on my kitchen floor and played me the 3 chords she knew, Thig the cat watching from a respectful distance. She asked once, in the careful way children ask things they've been thinking about for a while, if I was sad. Sometimes, I said, but not the same kind as before. She nodded like this made sense. Then she played her 3 chords again. I have a letter on my refrigerator now, written in green marker on notebook paper. I love you, Grandma. You make the best pancakes. I drew you a butterfly. The butterfly had 7 legs. I didn't correct it. It was perfect. I did something else that winter. Harold and I had talked for years about going to Asheville. He grew up 2 hours from there and always said it was the kind of place you needed to slow down to understand. We never went. There was always something. A school year, a health thing, a year when money was tighter, and in the years when his health was the thing that made travel impossible. I booked a room at a small inn near the River Arts District. 5 nights. January, which everyone said was the wrong time, too cold, too quiet. I booked it anyway because I had learned something useful about wrong times. The room had a window seat and a wood stove and a view of bare trees against a gray sky, and I sat in it every morning with coffee and Harold's old copy of a Wendell Berry collection he'd read so many times the spine had given out and he'd had it rebound. I walked every afternoon, ate at small places with handwritten menus, talked to strangers about nothing important. Came home 5 days later with cold cheeks and a print I'd bought from a woman at a gallery and a very specific kind of quiet inside me that was not emptiness. People ask me still whether I regret it, whether I regret the estate, whether I should have left the door open further, whether it was too permanent. The honest answer is that I grieve. I grieve the daughter I thought I raised. I grieve the version of our relationship where Sunday phone calls were real and the visits were long enough for a second cup of coffee. That person may have existed once, or I may have been building her in my imagination the whole time, papering over the gaps with explanations that were easier than the truth. My pastor, a wiry, plain-spoken woman named Reverend Coates, who has seen enough of people's lives to have stopped being surprised by any of them, said something that I've kept with me. "You're not punishing your daughter," she said. "You're just finally believing what she showed you." That's it, exactly. My daughter showed me who she was in a dozen small ways and several large ones, and I kept looking past it, kept finding the more charitable interpretation, the way you position a lamp to make a room look better than it is. I was so committed to the version of her that loved me simply and without agenda, that I couldn't see the one who was filling out forms. I see now. And seeing clearly is not the same thing as being hard. I think about Tamsin sometimes, the neighbor girl with the recycling bins who looked through a fence slat on an ordinary Wednesday morning and saw something worth stopping for. She didn't know me well. We'd waved over the fence, traded pleasantries. Once I brought over zucchini from the garden when I'd grown more than I could eat. She owed me nothing. She stopped anyway. I brought her a plant a month after I came home from the hospital, stood on her porch with a rosemary in a clay pot, and said, "You saved my life." She went pink and said she'd only called 911. I said that was enough. It was more than enough. She started waving from her window in the mornings when she sees me heading out for my walk. Every morning, I wave back. I don't know her well, and I may never know her well, but I know the shape of who she is. Some people look through fences. Some people look past. The ones who look through are worth more than I spent years thinking they were. It is March now, 16 months since the garden. My speech is fully back, has been since about day 2, and the cardiologist says the pathways look good and the medication is doing what it should. Harold's garden will be ready to plant in 6 weeks. I have already ordered seeds, the Romas, a paste variety, a small crop of sweet peppers because I've started eating them roasted with feta. And I've decided that at 67 I am allowed to add new things to my life without apology. The writing class has 12 people now. When I started it, we had 5. One of the women, a retired postal worker named June, who drives 30 minutes on bad hips to be there every Monday, wrote a piece last month about her mother that made everyone in the room go very still and then start clapping without quite deciding to. That's what stories can do when they're told true. I am telling you this one true. Every part of it. Here is what I know at 67, with a repaired brain and a gray cat and a kitchen full of Harold's presents. Even though Harold is gone, the people who will sit in uncomfortable chairs for 9 hours are not always the people with your last name. Sometimes they're the woman you once asked how she was doing on a Friday afternoon when she was 15 and no one else was asking. Sometimes they're the neighbor who barely knows you. Sometimes they're the 22-year-old who happened to be taking her recycling out at the right moment on a Wednesday in June. And the people who fill out memory care forms while you're still sharp enough to catch them. Those people have already told you everything you need to know. You just have to decide when you're ready to hear it. I was ready. It cost me something. I won't pretend it didn't. But here's the other thing I know. I have a butterfly drawing with 7 legs on my refrigerator. I have a cat who sits in the window to watch me leave and is always there when I come back. I have a writing class and a library and a small inn in Asheville that I plan to revisit in October when the leaves are turning. I have a life that is entirely, uncompromisingly mine. And for the first time in longer than I can measure, when I wake up in the morning and look out at Harold's garden coming back to itself in the early spring light, I am not waiting for anyone to give me permission to be glad.